Hey, my skillers people, how you doing? Baden Schaff here, and we've got Steve Giuliano, 6 a.m. in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, the great man, on a Saturday morning, no less, has got up to break down Tommy Fleetwood here. So thanks for joining us, Steve.
Thanks for having me, bud.
Mate, awesome as always. So this is on a Saturday morning. This is overnight. Tommy Fleetwood is 9 under in Dubai. So maybe by the time people are watching this, he's already won the race to Dubai, just had an epic season. And it's a great golf swing, and everyone loves it for many different reasons. It's quite unique. We've got this abbreviated follow-through and the way his sort of wrist work. But I'd love to get your take on it because I think that I see a lot of things in this that potentially I think you would also love. So let's have a chat about it. So we were talking previously about sort of his arm structure.
Yeah, so I mean, if you take him back to set up there, I think he's just kind of moved the club away. But I think a lot of people can learn just simply from the structure of his setup. And he's got nice foot flare, which allows, I feel, for some nice stability when he sets up, but also good range of motion in his hip and his knees when he's turning. And if you look at the radius that he set from his left shoulder to the club head, it pretty much just forms a straight line. Sorry, left arm all the way down to the club head. I think a lot of people can learn from that because we don't really see setups that organized. And I find when we get poor arm structures, perhaps hands are set back, it's very hard to create good impact conditions. I think a lot can be learnt there.
Yeah, it really sets off a sequence, doesn't it, from there? It's easy to get probably the club head moving first and not look like there's too much drag and things like that.
Sure, and to a certain extent, he's presetting his impact condition. I know impact's going to be a lot more aggressive than that. His hands are going to be a lot more forward, but again, sometimes it's tougher for the avid golfer to get into a strong impact position if they're not starting in some sort of structured position.
Yeah, great. And then that's something you see during the takeaway as well, isn't it? You see him hold that shape with his arms.
Absolutely. And just one other point maybe on the setup as well.
Yep.
Which I like, and I think a lot of people can learn from. If you look at the center of his belt and the center of his chest, they're pretty much lined up over the top of one another.
Yeah.
So we could say his two centers, his belt, so the midpoint of his belt, pretty much lined up. And again, you see that with good iron players, you'll tend to see a little bit more tilt back, perhaps with the driver, but again, a very solid looking structure to his setup.
Yeah,
he looks centers.
Sorry, mate. Yeah, he starts on top of it, doesn't he, really? And as you say, with iron players, it sort of very much lends itself to that ball first contact.
Yeah.
Everyone's, most coaches are desperate for.
And I'm sure if we had him standing on two pressure plates, he's going to be about 55, 45. And again, this is a very common trait with tour players in general. They probably average somewhere between 51 to 55 left to right when they're starting for the right-handers.
Yeah, really interesting. And then that sort of leads into the next conversation I want to talk to you about, which is center of mass and center of pressure. So you did something the other day, or you posted something the other day on Instagram, which I thought was awesome, which was just this really great demonstration of the misconception probably of what a weight shift actually is and what we've thought it was for years, and people wanting to visually move from side to side. So do you want to just talk about what the difference between those two things are?
Yeah, so if we focused on, let's say, the center of mass being somewhere around the navel area, maybe above the belt line, I certainly deal with it on a regular basis, and I'm sure you do too. We see a lot of our students moving this center of mass, a long way off to the ball. Often we see lower body, upper body translating a long way to the right. Yeah. So that would be an idea of moving the center of mass too far away from the target, and then they have a hard time getting back on the ball. When we look at Tommy, we probably see more of what we'd call a pressure shift. So his center of mass is staying more or less in the same position. Certainly there's movement there and rotation, but we'd probably, and depending on the player, we'd probably argue that the furthest that his pressures shifted to the right would be around P2 and a half, where the club's the furthest away from the target. in that, yeah, around there. So he's probably got like 60-65% of his pressure shifted to the inside, but we don't see that in a sense of body weight moving across. So I think that would be a fair description of, you know, he's shifted some pressure, but he hasn't moved his mass, which is essentially kind of his lower section, if you like, too far across.
So do you think he'd be
his
feeling
upper lower section too far across?
So the pressure shift is felt, do you think somewhere where I've drawn that purple line, like is it felt on the inside of the right leg? That's where, so all the pressure is going into the ground in that right leg on the way back without the actual mass moving across.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people don't realize, even though there's some pressure shift going across, there still is a lot of grounding on that lead leg.
Yeah.
And even if you see some guys that raise the heel up, there's still some pressure in there. So, you know, I think that can be, it's definitely hard to see in 2D form like this, and we're kind of splitting hairs when we're talking about it, but really need to get into, you know, looking at force plate data and things like that. But when you see Tommy at the top there, clearly he's recentered his weight, and he's probably got more pressure on left now than right, because he's already moved into early transition phase.
Which is, you know, it's an interesting conversation, because I think that there is this big debate about from the top rotation versus lateral transition, about bumping across. And I think it'd be maybe something to touch on here. Like, you can see that Tommy's is perhaps one of the most exaggerated on tour in terms of his lateral transition on the way down here. So he has a huge bump with his hips laterally into the wall, or past his impact position, I suppose. Past his setup position on the way down. What's your preference there? Are you trying to get people to have more lateral, more rotation? How do you look at this?
Yeah, a lot of it depends on positioning as well, where they are at the top, what they may or may not need. I also think it's how they create speed. You know, for years, guys have had lots of lateral shift and have created enough speed they're able to push down and still move around. And I'm also looking at upper body. As Tommy kind of shifts forward, and he does have a fairly aggressive lateral shift forward, you know, he tends to have a little bit of secondary spine tilt or axis tilt back behind the ball, and we see that with his head falling back. I would imagine that's something he's working on to kind of minimize. It's probably a little bit more than what he would like.
Yep.
So in his case, it's probably a little too much. You know, I really don't know his patterns. It's hard for me to say, but it's probably a little too much. And he's probably always working to just kind of tighten that up or improve that to some extent. Certainly with a driver, it helps with launch. Sometimes with an iron, if it's too much, it can cause issues with contact. So I don't have a major preference. For me, it's definitely a combination of, you know, some lateral and some rotation. Some guys who get into earlier rotation can manage it very well, and vice versa.
So what are the dangers, I suppose, of too much lateral and too much rotation? Yeah. Also, if someone's just spinning on the way down and has no lateral, what can be going wrong there? And maybe vice versa if it's just all lateral and no rotation.
Yeah, so from a hand path idea, if you have way too much rotation, the lead arm gets too far out.
Yeah.
And depending on what the shaft's doing, that could kick it out. I mean, in some cases, it can actually drop it way too much, and the club gets caught way behind. So then it becomes like a sequence issue.
Yep.
With that, normally the upper body's getting like too far on top of the golf ball. So then we have a swing direction that can be too far left. We could also have an angle of attack that's too far down. Tommy's a good case to show a slight exaggeration of that shifting that he has, although I think he does it really nicely, where his head starts to fall back a little too far through impact. Now, he's a great player. He's got great release patterns, and he's able to coordinate his impact really well. And we're speaking just off screen about how he maintains really good arm structure through the ball. And to me, that's really a key area. You know, if we looked at the space between his arms, and we often see a lot of golfers, certainly pros I do, you know, using a ball in between the arms. And the idea is that they're trying to keep good arm structure, which really relates back to the consistency of their impact condition.
Yeah.
And I think Tommy does a great job here, and a lot of his swing rehearsals are trying to keep his arms closer, straighter, feel more upper body rotation doing the work, and I think he does a great job of that for sure.
Yeah, this is the smart ball, isn't it? That Justin Rose uses. It's and it's very much what Ben Hogan used to talk about, which is wrapping. He used to, the image in his very famous book was that his forearms were bound like a driver head used to be bound back in the day when we were kids.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Hogan always talked about wrapping his forearms that way. And then what do you think? So the thing I think about Tommy, which what I might actually do is grab him out from the side angle and we can go through that. But it's actually his wrist angles, the way he looks like he's got this abbreviated follow through on the way through. What's that a consequence of, do you think, if I expand this out? And it's this, well, actually, do you want to have a chat about his setup, his wrist angles, and maybe how that affects what's happening here on the way back? Do you want to have a chat about his arm direction and maybe what's happening with his legs and everything on the way back here?
Sure. I mean, everything's pretty nice, but if we started with his setup position, I think some of the things or some of the aesthetics that can be visual off-putting is, Tommy has a little bit of curve in his lower back, and he has a little bit of rounding in his upper back. But I guess make no mistake, he's a very strong dude. His fitness trainer that he works with, Kevin Duffy, they're always doing work on how he's moving through the posture that he has, and definitely like improving his posture. You can follow him also on social media. So he's a very strong guy. I mean, in that last event that he won, he was bombing some drives, 350 plus. He probably doesn't fly it out there like some of the other guys, but he certainly has a lot of raw speed there that he works on and can chase it out there. So you see a little bit of that shape, which I think is just Tommy's kind of normal disposition. Yeah. But in his case, he's so strong, it doesn't affect anything to do with how he can move athletically.
So if you were teaching, I mean, obviously, as you said, this is his natural disposition, so it's not going to be super easy for him to change. But if someone arrived to you with a really exaggerated S-bend, you would just rather see this maybe a little bit more slouchy. People get a little flatter in their hips potentially and curved in their spine. Is that what you'd be looking for?
As in, like, I'd say flatter from tailbone to his upper back.
Yeah, so you'd want to see that gap filled in, sort of thing, so that it's not
correct. Some people are just naturally in that position. We see that a lot more with females, certainly, than males.
Yeah, definitely. It's not an easy thing to fix, is it? When you get people that have that really exaggerated S-bend, it's almost too good a posture, isn't it? When they've got that, they've been trying to keep a really straight back, and it's to tell them to feel like they're 70 years old and get really slouchy. It's a very unique feel for those students.
Exactly.
Okay, so I mean, one of the things personally I just love in his golf swing is just, it probably looks like, as you said, because of the way he starts with his wrist angles, they're so passive during the golf swing, aren't they? His wrists are so passive, which allows it to look like it does here, and doesn't go in too much, doesn't look too vertical. It just looks like it sits in the middle of him, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, Tommy's arms float a little bit off his chest.
Yeah.
From P1 to P2, but certainly nothing that I'm sure is a concern for him. When I watch him on the range, and I was looking at a couple of videos, he does do a lot of work on just managing his takeaway position. I know he uses kind of shafts in the ground, sometimes, at both ends, under and above his shaft, just to kind of manage that initial part of the swing. But he has a great change.
Is that, so he would, so you're saying, so he has a tendency to get it too far in or something like, is that what you're saying, or too vertical, or?
I couldn't tell you because I don't know his patterns, but what I do see is he does set up shafts very similar to what you've placed there, and he's working on just basically going through that gate in the initial part of the takeaway.
Which I love. And then he's got, this is something obviously I know that you teach, and it's something we just see so much more of, is this change in the lower body, which probably, there was this X Factor stretch and these things that were probably taught during the 90s, early 2000s, which was all about lower body resistance. And I know I was taught that as a 17, 18-year-old. I was taught, do not turn your hips and turn your top as far as you possibly can. And then,
Absolutely.
and that's what I worked on that for years. And then I remember going to see
backbreaker stuff.
Exactly. And I remember going to see the coach that I now work with and have worked with for like 16 years, and he said, Baden, stop turning your top so far and let your lower body turn. It was the exact opposite. It was the exact opposite of everything I'd been working on for a few years. So we see that don't we? We see this great change in the lower body where the left knee comes out, right hip goes back, and we see he probably maintains a little bit of flex in that right knee, but there's definitely sort of that change in the lower body.
Yeah, and appreciate he's probably, at least the camera's probably lined up a little bit offline there because his stance line looks a little bit open. So we could probably give him even a little bit more change of knee flex if the camera was, let's say, somewhat more around to the right there.
Yeah, you'd be able to probably see through his legs almost, couldn't you? You could see.
Just about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say, yeah.
Sorry, you go.
No, I was just going to say from where he started, which may be 20 to 25 degrees of knee flex, he's probably changed his knee flex to a point where his right leg is now somewhere around the vicinity of maybe 10 to 15, give or take. So there has to be some extending of the trail leg, which obviously causes that left knee to flex forward. And it also helps him to maintain his inclination to the ground. So, from right shoulder to left shoulder, we see that he's going to be more or less in the same tilt as
where he
started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So besides obviously allowing him to stay over the ball and keep his shape, what else does this do for you? Like,
pretty much just what you mentioned there. I mean, by keeping his inclination to the ground, or his side bend, if you like, he's able to find the ball much more easily. Now, again, at his level, he's going to do it anyway. But for a lot of the people out there that tend to lift up, or they really don't change their knee flex, and are flexible enough to kind of get into something that might resemble this position, they're going to have a hard time finding the ground because maybe they've stood up or they've moved too far off the ball, their center of mass too far off. There's a lot of things there that, again, he does really nicely. Good players, I think we have to appreciate, can get away with doing a lot of different things. And sometimes it's hard to pick it to a player, I believe, that has a very sort of idiosyncratic move and say, let's do that. This is more of a swing where I think a lot of people can learn a lot from, because there's a lot of good standards in there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I absolutely love it. I think I actually wanted to ask you this. I saw on your social media, you had a vote up, didn't you? You say, who do you prefer, Rory or Tommy? And most people came out. I think it was relatively close, but most people said Rory.
Higher.
55-45. Yeah.
Okay. So that's pretty close. And look, this might be sacrilegious for me to say, but I absolutely 100% prefer Tommy's. I would so much rather use this as a model than Rory, which sounds crazy because obviously Rory has, the results that he's had, playing incredibly.
Sure.
I mean, this is so much more achievable for the average golfer, what Tommy's doing here.
Yeah, I mean, Rory's definitely probably got the nod when it comes to like flow, grace, rhythm, tempo, that sort of thing. I feel like Tommy's moves a little cleaner, especially going back, and he certainly finds, if you like, for one of the term, positions a little bit better, maybe a little bit more repeatable.
Yeah.
But both amazing. I mean, number 2 and number 10 in the world, so we're not certainly giving him a hard time.
Oh, God, no, exactly right. But I think sometimes you do need to make that differentiation of what can you take, what can the average person, I suppose that's what I'm always thinking about when, I maybe do instructional stuff or whatever it is. It's like, what can you take away from this, the average person? I think a lot of the moves, Rory puts himself in or positions, the average person probably missed the ball, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, with driver, so, but whereas I think what Tommy's doing here, as you said, so many people can take a lot away from this. So what do you think? Let's have a chat about this downswing, because as you said, he does have that increase in the right side bend on the way down. Let's have a chat about this and tell us what you say.
Yeah, well, even though Tommy does have that pretty aggressive shifting move forward, he does open up very aggressively as well. So in his case, it's not a big deal. I think when we're talking about pure sliding, we're actually not rotating.
Yeah.
Or we're looking at less rotation. And that's where we see a lot of hang back. We probably see a little bit of an undynamic move through the ball. If you take him back to left arm parallel P5, we can see that, I mean, his hips are clearly open there.
Yeah.
And they've opened up just as fast as his move forward. And that's why he can clearly hit the ball, you know, as well as what he can, versus, say, just a pure lateral slide.
Yeah. So that creates like a lot of stretch and resistance through there, doesn't it? Would you say it's almost like a separation of the top and the lower?
Yeah, so there's definitely a stretch, X factor stretch that's occurred, which would basically mean that whatever upper body turn versus lower body he had at the top, he's increased that. And that's definitely a power move. Rory probably does it the most.
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting topic, isn't it? Is how open you want to get, because it can fly in the face. Exactly what you said earlier on is that if you get too open with your top early, your arms go out and you slice it.
Yeah.
So, or pull it,
absolutely,
whatever it might be. So for the average student, they sort of know that they're supposed to get open with something, but they also want to shallow it. And sometimes those two things can maybe sort of butt against each other, unless you've got the sequences right.
And the big challenge, I think, with the avid golfer that is looking at these ideas, they're probably never really in the structured position that we'd see a player like Rory, a player like Tommy, even to begin with. I mean, they don't have good wrist angles. They don't have good arm depth. They don't, you know, their bodies aren't in stable positions at the top from face on and down the line. And any downswing move that they're thinking of making is just happening at the wrong time. So I would say in their case, it has to be a case of, are they, you know, setting themselves up for the downswing that they're looking to make? You know, be that more rotation, be that they have a little bit more shift there. I think that's a very important point for a lot of them. Again, better players can get away with, you know, a lot of different things. And sometimes it's hard just to mimic one position that they're making that we like, because we don't really appreciate all the other good things that they've done before that, or how athletic they are.
How talented, did you say?
Yeah, how athletic they are to make you know, their move from the top of swing, like a Dustin Johnson, for example, or a John Ram. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, look, you know, it's very, very difficult for those reasons. Are you able to sequence it up? Are you athletic enough to, you know, create all of these, you know, dynamic moves on the way down? But I think you're 100% right as well, is that get your setup right, get the angles right there, and then you've got every chance of getting things right. But yeah, also to what you said is that just trying to get one thing in this gigantic puzzle of sequences can be the hardest thing in the world, isn't it? You've got to have all the pieces. So let's have a chat about this probably much talked about follow through, which you know both of us love. You know, so this is the arm structure and the wrist angles here. That looks like his setup angles, doesn't it? Like that is exactly what you talked about. That he's the distance of his forearms, his wrist angles. That's literally what he started with at the start. Yeah,
so you could take his inclination to the ground there, or the angle that his kind of spine and head is on, at that a little further through, you know, where you kind of moved it, a little, maybe like 1 or 2 steps further through, and that'd be very consistent with where he was at setup. It'd be very consistent with where he was at the top of the swing. Yeah. But that's just really about how his body's moving.
Yep.
A lot of people look at his arm structure or his finish, and from what I've looked at or seen some videos on, he's done a lot of work where he's done straight arm swings. I think he calls them windmill swings, where he's feeling like very wide back and through. And he's learned to hit a lot of shots that way to control the face. He doesn't feel like when he's doing that his body's slowing down, especially his upper body, and he doesn't have any face rotation.
Right.
I think he's practiced that. So much. He's just learned then to add some rehinge at the end.
Yeah.
Kind of radial deviation, if you want it technical, where we see the club kind of, you know, back up, you know, kind of matching his spine at the end. And a lot of that is just energy transfer. You know, we can't, if he just did straight arms, he wouldn't have quite enough speed. Right. So we see that kind of rehinging back, you know, fairly aggressively, puts loft onto the shot, and also stops the face from closing. So I think he's just got very good at going from a straight arm finish to adding this rehinge, if you like, and he's able to make that work. And it's almost, although we do see it with a lot of, shorter shots with other players. I mean, I certainly see a lot with Rory. You see it with really all players, but he's kind of made it work almost through the bag.
That's, I think, the really unique thing, isn't it?
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, is that like he does with driver at times, doesn't he? He hits like, it looks like a punch shot or a cutoff or something with driver.
Yeah, I remember watching him in Abu Dhabi 2 years ago. I just happened to be over there, and he actually won that tournament. And he was doing the exact same drill with his driver on the range.
Wow.
Completely through the bag. So that was interesting. That's interesting that he won that week as well. But yeah, it's something that he's been able to do just fine, and he can make it work through the bag, no problem.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what would you say, like, if he's trying to hold his wrist very much, in that same structure, I think the word release is maybe misunderstood, or a lot of students don't know how to do it. Like, how would you explain releasing the golf club if you're not using your hands to roll through impact or whatever it might be?
So for me, everything's related back to what the club face is doing during the swing, and especially on the downswing.
Right.
So if you look at Tommy Fleetwood, he's got the club face reasonably square as he transitions. He probably goes into a little bit of flattening of that wrist, not certainly not too much. And if you look at his face there, it's conditioned, although it's a little bit blurry. It's close to matching his spine. It's definitely more on the toe down, which would be reasonably square. So he doesn't really need any rolling of the wrist, if you like. He doesn't really need to do anything apart from just hit the shot on his rotation.
Yeah.
Now, there's lots of golfers that have the face a little bit more open. I think Matt Wolf's a good example, and he has a lot of kind of late pronation of the wrist.
Yeah.
He has a lot of late kind of turning down of that wrist. And again, he's able to do that very well. He times it down there at the bottom whilst he's still rotating. So I think a lot of it, to me, has to do with what's the face doing as it's coming into the ball. More closed face conditions. Zach Johnson is going to require zero forearm rotation, almost like a blocking release.
Yeah, 100%. So
which is effectively taking some speed away, but
right.
For some, quite easy to manage the face.
Yeah. So, and I think have you got a hack motion? Have you used a hack motion?
I've seen them, but I haven't got them. I haven't got one.
I think it must be the only device you don't have, I think, potentially. I'm sure you'll be getting with it. I think they're really cool. I think they're amazing. And what they do show is just, there are definite patterns, the best players are always, maybe they've got a little bit of extension at the start and then on the way back. And then it does move into that little bit of flexion, which I think, as you were sort of getting at, can be a result of purely momentum as well. Like in the transition, you probably always, the better players generally always go into that flexion on the way down.
Yeah.
And then, so you would say that once that occurs with the left wrist, it's then a case of, it's a body release rather than anything really operating with the hands rolling on.
I mean, I'm not saying good players don't feel anything with the hands.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Tiger's spoken about that at length very recently. He hits a lot of shots with his hands. But it's interesting when you look at someone like, Tommy Fleetwood through the ball, Justin Rose through the ball, right at this phase here that you're kind of clicking through, and you look at that face condition, Tiger Woods through the ball. I feel like they're in a very, very similar position regardless of what they're feeling. So good players are going to tell you, certain things that they're feeling. Maybe they feel a little release. Maybe they feel like they're holding. But if we looked at the aesthetics of it, and I know, again, 2D is a little bit subjective in a video, but we're going to see very similar hand path face conditions for, let's say, a fairly stock shot that they're trying to hit.
The other thing I'd say about Tiger talking about his hands a lot is that I think there's a difference between feeling something in your hands and using them a lot, if that makes sense.
I would agree, yeah, 100%.
I think I heard a lot of people talking about that, and I think you've just got to be a tiny little bit careful, because I feel it in my hands as well. Like I'm sure you do. We all feel it in our hands.
Yep.
Does that mean they're hyperactive? Not necessarily.
Exactly. I think that's a good point.
And then you want to, what's the umbrella finish that I hear you talk about? Do you want to just explain that to people? And I have heard that, and people talk about it a lot.
Yeah, so the umbrella finish, which is really a concept by Andy Plummer.
Right.
Is this kind of look here where we see right about there, we see the finish kind of chopped off, sawn off, if you like. And if we placed an umbrella along the shaft there, that would resemble, you know, holding up an umbrella, but with some side bend.
Gotcha.
And it's often a look that you would teach, especially for someone who's struggling with impact. You know, we tend to see a lot of, you know, very poor arm positions. We tend to see, you know, the arms kind of, don't know if you can see me clearly, that the arms kind of like folding kind of over the shoulder, and there's no real good structure. So, you know, having the arms straight, moving around the body can be a very good concept for a lot of people that have poor impact conditions. It can help to line the radius up or the impact condition up when they're hitting. And this is, again, something that Tommy has worked on. I've heard him talk about it. And then all we're doing is kind of adding the wrist conditions, if you like, the hinging, which kind of gives us that look of the umbrella finish.
Right. Yeah.
Tilted sideways.
Yeah. It's just got that little bit of angle over the ball. Steve, that's awesome. You're a superstar. That was great. I think, you know, you and I could probably carry on forever, but we don't want to bore people to death. And maybe we want to leave a little bit of goodness in there as well. So we'll do a whole bunch of these going forward, because there's millions of patterns out there, especially on tour. You know, there's so many guys out there doing things so differently, and we'll look to be breaking down a lot of these in the future.
Good stuff, bud. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. Enjoy your Saturday morning. What have we? It's now 7 a.m. or something like that, so you can go and
head to the lesson tea.
All right, mate. You're an absolute superstar. Thanks so much for your time.
All right. Thanks, bud.
Thanks. Bye.